The morning alarm echoed through the metallic corridors of Nova Academy, a massive space station orbiting the gas giant Kepler 440b. Hannah Kim pressed her face against the viewport in her small dormitory room. Watching the swirling storms of the planet below, 3 months ago, she would have been amazed by the sight. Now, it just reminded her how far she was from home. She gathered her quantum physics textbooks and dated tablets. Checking her reflection in the mirror, the dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent studying while her alien classmates partied in the recreation decks. Being one of only 12 humans in a school of 3,000 alien students wasn't the adventure she'd imagined when she left Seoul. The corridor buzzed with activity as students from dozens of different species hurried to there. Morning classes. Hannah kept her head down, hoping to avoid attention. The Zentarians with their multiple arms clicked past her, deep in conversation about their advanced engineering projects. A group of floating ethereals drifted by, their translucent bodies shimmering, like jellyfish in space. Even the massive, rock-like granite people seemed to have friends among their own kind. But Hannah walked alone. Her hand moved instinctively to her grandmother's necklace. The one constant companion she had in this vast, alien world, the pendant, was unlike anything she'd seen in jewelry stores back on Earth. It wasn't quite round, wasn't quite square, and seemed to shift between different metallic colors depending on the light. Her grandmother had worn it every day, until she passed away last year, always claiming it brought her good luck in her research. Dr. Sujin Kim was brilliant. Her mother had said while placing the necklace round Hannah's neck before her departure, "She would have been so proud to see you studying among the stars." The cafeteria entrance loomed ahead, and Hannah's stomach tightened. This was always the worst part of her day. The massive dining hall could seat over 1,000 students, with specialized sections for different species' dietary needs. The human section was pitifully small, just a few tables near the back where the lighting was dimmer. Well. Look what crawled out of the primitive section. Hannah's blood ran. Colton, the voice belonged to Vextel, a 7-foot-tall Krillian whose blue-scaled skin caught the light like polished metal. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and their even more advanced sense of superiority. Vextel's gang consisted of students from various species who had bonded over their shared belief that humans were nothing more than upright animals pretending to be intelligent. "I smell carbon-based fear," laughed Ulf, or insectoid chitinous whose mandibles clicked with amusement. "Maybe we should put the little human back in her cage." The corridor around them began to fill with other students, all pulling out their recording devices. Humiliating humans had become popular entertainment at Nova Academy, with the videos often going viral across the galactic network. Hannah had seen dozens of clips of her human classmates being mocked, their Earth accents mimicked, their customs ridiculed. "Please," Hannah whispered, clutching her books tighter. "I just want to go to class. Not so fast." Mudcrawler. Vextel's yellow eyes fixed on her necklace. "What's that primitive ornament you're wearing? Did you make it out of rocks and tree bark?" The gang erupted in laughter. A crowd was forming now, students from upper-level classes pausing to watch the show. Hannah noticed some of the faculty members in the distance, but they always seemed to find urgent business elsewhere when the bullying started. "It's just a necklace," Hannah said, her voice barely audible. "It belonged to my grandmother." "Your grandmother?" Vextel's voice stripped with mock sympathy. Was she one of those primitive Earth scientists who thought they could understand the universe with their little telescopes and calculators? The crowd laughed harder. Hannah felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. Her grandmother had been one of Earth's most respected physicists. But here, light years from home, her achievements meant nothing. I think our little human friend needs to learn her place in the galactic hierarchy. Vixtel continued, reaching out with his clawed hand. And that place doesn't include wearing jewelry meant for superior beings. No. Please don't, Hannah backed against the wall. But there was nowhere to go. The corridor had become a theater, with alien students recording from every angle. It's all I have left of my family. But Vextel wasn't listening. His claws closed round the necklace chain, and with a sharp yank, he tore it from her neck. The silver chain snapped with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet corridor. Hannah crumpled to her knees, tears streaming down her face, as she watched her most precious possession dangling from the alien's claws. The pendant caught the light and seemed to pulse with an inner fire, as if protesting its separation from her. Humans don't deserve to wear real jewelry, Vextel announced to the crowd. Holding the necklace high like a trophy, this belongs to superior beings now. Maybe I'll give it to my pet as a tutor. The crowd roared with laughter and approval. Recording devices flashed as students captured every moment of Hannah's humiliation. She could already imagine the video spreading across the galactic network. Another example of human weakness for alien entertainment. As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about what they'd witnessed, Hannah remained on the floor. Her tears had stopped, but something had changed in her dark eyes. The helpless desperation was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. She stood slowly, brushing off her uniform. Students were still laughing and pointing as they walked away, but Hannah barely noticed them. Her mind was racing, remembering conversations with her grandmother. Late-night discussions about her research and cryptic warnings about the true nature of the universe. Vextel was examining his prize, turning the pendant over in his claws while his gang admired their leader's latest trophy. They had no idea what they had just stolen. They couldn't possibly understand the significance of the simple-looking necklace that had been passed down through generations of the Kim family. But Hannah understood. And as she watched the alien bullies walk away with their prize, a smile played at the corners of her mouth. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken the weak human girl. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The advanced physics lab hummed with the quiet energy of dormant equipment. As evening settled over Nova Academy, most students had retreated to their dormitories or the entertainment decks, but the lab's sensors detected movement in the far corner where the quantum computation rays were housed. Professor Miron Joel's 6 arms moved with practiced efficiency as he secured the days. Experimental equipment, his compound eyes, each capable of seeing different spectrums of light, caught the faint glow emanating from Workstation 7. Someone was still working, and the energy signatures were unlike anything he'd seen from standard student projects. As he approached, his multiple eyes focused on a familiar figure hunched over a holographic display. Hannah Kim sat surrounded by floating equations that twisted and rotated in three-dimensional space, her fingers dancing across multiple input surfaces simultaneously. The mathematics she was manipulating made the Zentarian professors advanced. Brains struggled to keep up. "Hannah," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "What are you doing here so late?" The girl looked up, and Professor Jules was struck by the change in her appearance. Gone was the frightened, tearful student from the morning's incident. Her dark eyes held a clarity and purpose that seemed far older than her 17 years. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept, but her movements were precise and controlled. "Professor Jules," she said, her voice steady, "I needed somewhere quiet to think." The Zentarian's compound eyes swept over the holographic equations floating round her workstation. The mathematics were beyond graduate level, incorporating principles from theoretical physics that most students wouldn't encounter until their final year. More disturbing was the fact that some of the formulas appeared to be completely original. variations on established quantum mechanics that he'd never seen before. I heard about what happened today, he said gently, his voice carrying the warm harmonics that made Zentarians natural counselors. I'm sorry about your necklace. Vexterless behavior was completely unacceptable. We can file a complaint with the disciplinary board, perhaps even involve the Galactic Student Ethics Committee. Hannah's fingers paused over her calculations. A bitter smile crossed her lips. Do you really think they'll punish him? A Krillian noble son picking on a human. They'll probably give him a medal for maintaining proper species hierarchy. Professor Joel's 6 arms moved in a gesture of frustration. He'd been teaching at Nova Academy for 15 years, watching as anti-human sentiment grew stronger each semester. The rise of the Pure Galaxy movement, which promoted the idea that carbon-based life forms were evolutionary mistakes, had made life difficult for human students. The galaxy is changing, Hannah, he said sadly. But there are still those of us who believe in equality among all intelligent species. Equality? Hannah laughed. But there was no humor in it. Tell me, Professor, what do you know about the architect civilization? The sudden change of topic caught Professor Zlovgod. His compound eyes refocused, studying her face intently. The architects were a subject that fascinated xenoarchaeologists throughout the galaxy. But they were considered more legend than historical fact. The architects, he repeated, his voice uncertain. They're largely theoretical. Some scholars believe they were an ancient civilization that built the first hyperspace gates, but there's no concrete evidence they ever existed. But if they did exist, Hannah pressed, what would that mean for our understanding of galactic history? Professor Joel's multiple arms gestured thoughtfully. It would revolutionize everything. The hyperspace gate network is the foundation of modern galactic civilization. Without it, interstellar travel would still take centuries. If the architects really built the original gates, they would have been the most advanced civilization in galactic history. And then they vanished, Hannah said. Her fingers returning to her calculations, just disappeared without a trace. No ruins, no artifacts, no explanation. That's what makes most scholars skeptical, Professor Schell admitted. How does an entire civilization, especially one advanced enough to build hyperspace gates, simply disappear? Hal looked up from her work, and the professor saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It was the look of someone who knew a terrible secret. What if they didn't disappear, Professor? What if they evolved beyond physical form? The Zentarian's compound eyes widened. Evolution beyond physical form was a theoretical concept discussed in the most advanced xenobiology courses. The idea that a species could transcend their biological limitations and exist as pure consciousness. Was fascinating but unproven. That's an interesting theory, he said carefully. But even if such a thing were possible, there would be no way to prove it. No evidence, no way to communicate with them. Unless they left something behind, Hannah said quietly. A legacy, a gift for those who came after. Professor Jill moved closer to her workstation, his multiple eyes studying the equation she'd been working on. Hannah, what aren't you telling me? The girl was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that made the holographic mathematics shift and change. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My grandmother, Dr. Sujin Kim, wasn't just a physicist, she was a quantum archaeologist, specializing in the study of ancient technologies. She spent 30 years researching the architect civilization, following clues that led her to abandoned facilities throughout the galaxy. I remember reading about her work, Professor Schell said. She published some groundbreaking papers on quantum resonance archaeology, but I thought her research was purely theoretical. It wasn't. Hannah's eyes fixed on his. And the professor saw a depth of knowledge that shouldn't have been possible in someone so young. She found them, Professor, not the architects themselves, but their technology, their records, their legacy. That's impossible, Professor Jill breathed. If she had found actual architect technology, it would have been the discovery of the millennium. The entire galaxy would have known about it. Would they? Hannah asked. Or would they have tried to suppress it? My grandmother wasn't naive, Professor. She knew what would happen if the major powers learned about her discoveries. Wars would be fought over architect technology. Entire species would be enslaved or eliminated to control access to it. The professor's compound eyes focused on her with growing alarm. Hannah, what are you saying? That necklace Vextel stole wasn't just jewelry, she said, her voice growing colder. It was a quantum storage device, containing 30 years of my grandmother's research, star-maps, activation codes, historical records, and most importantly, the location of the last functional architect facility. Professor Joel's 6 arms moved in a gesture of disbelief. You're telling me that simple pendant contained the complete database of the most advanced civilization in galactic history. Hannah finished, including detailed instructions on how to access their technology. But how is that possible? The professor demanded. The storage capacity alone would require equipment the size of this entire laboratory. Hannah smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, Professor Jules saw something genuinely frightening in her expression, because the architects didn't just master hyperspace travel. Professor, they mastered quantum dimensional storage. That pendant exists in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, each one containing terabytes of compressed data. This is incredible, Professor Jules whispered. But if what you're saying is true, then Vextel and his friends have just stolen the most valuable artifact in the galaxy. They have. Hannah agreed. But here's the thing they don't know. The pendant isn't just a storage device. It's also a neural interface, designed to download its contents directly into the brain of whoever wears it. The professor's compound eyes widened in horror. You mean? Vextel and his gang are about to receive 30 years of architect knowledge directly into their primitive brains, Hannah said, her smile growing wider. The question is, will their minds be strong enough to handle it, or will they be driven completely insane? Professor Jules stared at her, finally understanding the cold calculation he'd seen in her eyes. You planned this, you knew what would happen when they took the necklace. I hoped it wouldn't come to this, Hannah said sadly. But they made their choice. Now they'll have to live with the consequences. In the distance, the Academy's emergency alarms began to sound. The first sign something was wrong came during breakfast on the 3rd day. Vextel sat at his usual table in the Krillian section of the cafeteria, staring at his nutrition paste with unfocused yellow eyes. His gang members exchanged worried glances as their leader muttered numbers under his breath, his clawed fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table's surface. Boss, you okay? Asked Swarth, the insectoid chitinous who served as Vextel's second in command. You've been acting weird since you got that human trinket. Vextel's head snapped up, his scaled face contorting with confusion. I can see them, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The pathways between stars, the quantum tunnels, that connect everything. His claws scraped against the metal table, leaving deep gouges. How do I know this? Round them. Other students began to notice the commotion. Vextel's reputation as the Academy's most feared bully made his strange behavior all the more unsettling. The massive Krillian who once dominated through physical intimidation now seemed fragile, almost broken. Maybe you should see the medical bay, suggested Crix, a purple-skinned Vorthan whose telepathic abilities made him useful for gathering gossip. "You look like you haven't slept in days. Sleep." Vextel laughed bitterly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see star charts, ancient symbols. Voices speaking in languages that died before our species even existed." He pulled the stolen necklace from beneath his uniform, the pendant now glowing with a soft, pulsing light. "This thing, it's doing something to me." The pendant had changed since he'd taken it from Hannah. What had once been a simple metallic ornament now seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Its surface covered in symbols that appeared and disappeared in endless cycles. The other students at the table leaned away instinctively, sensing something dangerous about the artifact. By the fifth day, Vextel's transformation had become impossible to ignore. During advanced stellar engineering class, he stood up in the middle of Professor Kath's lecture and began drawing equations on the holographic display that left the entire class speechless. The mathematical formulas he created were so complex that the Academy's quantum computers struggled to process them. "These calculations," Professor Kath stammered. His rock-like granite people features showing unprecedented confusion. "They suggest the possibility of instantaneous travel across galactic distances without hyperspace gates. But this is impossible. The energy requirements alone would require harnessing zero-point energy fluctuations in 11-dimensional space." Vextel finished, his voice strangely monotone. "The architects solved this problem for 0.7 million years ago using crystalline matrices that exist partially outside normal space-time." The classroom fell silent. Vextel, who had barely managed to pass basic math courses, had just described theoretical physics concepts that wouldn't be taught until graduate level. More disturbing was his casual mention of the architects, as if he'd met them personally. "How do you know about 11-dimensional mathematics?" Professor Keth demanded, his voice shaking. Vextel blinked, suddenly seeming to realize where he was. I don't know. The knowledge just appears in my mind, like memories that aren't mine." That afternoon, Vextel found himself in the Academy's advanced fabrication workshop, his clawed hands moving with impossible precision as he assembled components into a device that shouldn't have been possible. His gang watched in amazement as their leader, who had always relied on brute force rather than intelligence, created something that defied every law of physics they knew. The device was beautiful in its alien complexity. Crystalline matrices hummed with contained energy, connected by filaments of pure light that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously as Vextel worked. His movements became more fluid, more confident, as if he was following instructions from a teacher only he could hear. "Boss, what is that thing?" Zorth asked, his mandibles clicking nervously. "A quantum resonance detector," Vextel replied without looking up. "It can locate other architect artifacts within 1,000 light-year radius." He paused, his claws hovering over the device. "But I don't understand how I know this. These aren't my memories." The workshop's other students had gathered to watch, their various species united in amazement at what they were witnessing. Even the advanced engineering students couldn't understand the principles behind Vextel's creation. "The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases," whispered Dr. Yunseo Chang, the workshop supervisor. "This technology is centuries ahead of anything we have." As the week progressed, the other members of Vextel's gang began experiencing similar symptoms. Zor found himself speaking in ancient languages he'd never learned, while Crix's telepathic abilities suddenly expanded to include species he'd never been able to read before. The stolen necklace seemed to be affecting all of them, though Vextel, who wore it constantly, showed the most dramatic changes from the shadows of the workshop's upper observation deck. Hannah Kim watched and took notes. Her grandmother's research had been correct. The pendant was designed to interface with any intelligent species, downloading architect knowledge directly into their neural pathways. But there was a crucial detail her grandmother had discovered through decades of careful study. The human brain was uniquely adapted to process this information safely. Other species could access fragments of architect knowledge, but the complete database was too vast, too alien for their minds to handle. The pendant was designed to work with human neural pathways, which had evolved specifically to interface with architect technology. For other species, prolonged exposure would lead to madness, or worse, fascinating, isn't it? Hannah turned to find Dr. Jaewoo Park, the Academy's head of xenoarchaeology, standing behind her. The middle-aged professor's sharp eyes were fixed on Vextel's impossible creation. "I've been watching you as much as them," he continued. "Your recent test scores, your sudden mastery of concepts that should take years to learn. Yesterday, you solved a theoretical problem in my advanced civilizations class that has stunned scholars for decades." Hannah remained silent, but her dark eyes never left the scene below where Vextel was making final adjustments to his device. "Miss Kim, I need to speak with you privately," Dr. Park said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers. In his office, surrounded by artifacts from dozens of worlds. The professor leaned forward intently. Ancient tablets covered in indecipherable symbols lined the walls, while holographic displays showed star charts of long-dead civilizations. Dr. Park had spent his career studying the mysteries of the galaxy's past, but he'd never encountered anything like what he was witnessing. "Where did you learn architect mathematical principles?" he asked bluntly. Hannah met his gaze steadily. "What makes you think I learned them?" "Because you used them to solve the Kepler paradox yesterday," Dr. Park replied. "A mathematical puzzle that has consumed the greatest minds in the galaxy for over a century. You solved it in 15 minutes using principles that shouldn't exist in any known database. Perhaps the principles aren't as unknown as you think," Hannah said quietly. Dr. Park's eyes narrowed. "The architect's civilization is theoretical. There's no proof they ever existed, isn't there?" Hannah gestured toward the window, where they could see the workshop below. "Look at what's happening to Vextel. Look at the technology he's creating. Does that seem theoretical to you?" The professor followed her gaze, watching as Vextel's impossible device began to emit a low, harmonic tone that seemed to resonate through the station's hull. "You're saying that necklace he stole contains actual architect technology?" "I'm saying that necklace has been in my family for generations," Hannah replied calmly. "And I'm saying that my grandmother spent 30 years learning to interface with it safely." Dr. Park's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're saying you can access architect knowledge without losing your sanity?" "I didn't learn there. Mathematics, Professor," Hannah said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed far beyond his. "I remembered them because humans aren't just another species that evolved in this galaxy. We're their descendants. The advanced quantum physics classroom was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout Nova Academy about Vextel's strange transformation, and students from every species had gathered to witness what Professor Keth promised would be a groundbreaking demonstration. Ein of 11-dimensional mathematics, Vextel stood at the front of the class, but he was no longer the same being who had terrorized human students just weeks before. His blue scales had taken on an otherworldly shimmer, shifting through colors that didn't exist in normal space. The stolen necklace hung round his neck, pulsing with rhythmic light that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. "Today, we will explore the fundamental nature of reality itself," Vextel announced, his voice carrying strange harmonics that made the universal translators crackle with static. "The barriers between dimensions are not walls, but doorways waiting to be opened." Professor Keth, a massive granite person whose rocky features rarely showed emotion, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should start with basic principles, he suggested. The students haven't covered multidimensional theory yet. But Vextel wasn't listening. His clawed hands moved through the air, activating the classroom's hard light projectors with gestures that seemed to bend space itself. The holographic display erupted into a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But this wasn't any star chart the students had ever seen. Ancient symbols appeared at locations throughout the galactic spiral, marking points that didn't correspond to any known star systems. The symbols pulsed with the same rhythm as the necklace, creating a pattern that seemed to stretch across both space and time. These are the nexus points, Vextel continued, his voice growing stronger. The locations where the architects built their greatest works, gates not just through space, but through the very fabric of existence itself. The students watched in amazement as the holographic galaxy began to rotate, showing pathways of light connecting the marked locations. The network formed a complex web that spanned the entire galactic disk, with Earth sitting at one of the most significant junction points. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Janelli, a xenoarchaeology professor who had spent decades studying ancient civilizations. "These locations, some of them are in regions we've never explored. Others are in systems that shouldn't exist according to our stellar cartography." Vextel's yellow eyes fixed on her, but they no longer looked like the eyes of a Krillian. They held depths that seemed to stretch back millions of years. "Your maps are incomplete, Dr. Lee. Your understanding of the galaxy is that of children playing with toys." The temperature in the room began to drop as Vextel's transformation accelerated. His scales now shifted through impossible colors, and the air around him seemed to ripple with energy. The necklace was glowing so brightly that several students had to shield their eyes. "The architects," Vextel's voice was changing, becoming layered with harmonics that made the very walls of the classroom vibrate. "They're calling to us. They want to come home." Professor Jules, who had been monitoring the situation from the back of the room, immediately activated his emergency communicator. "Medical team to Quantum Physics Lab 7. We have a code blue situation." But before help could arrive, Vextel began to convulse. His massive frame shook violently as alien knowledge flooded his consciousness faster than his brain could process it. Ancient memories that weren't his own crashed through his mind like a tsunami of information. "I can see them," he gasped, his voice now barely recognizable. "The architects, they're not gone. They're waiting for their children to remember who they are." The holographic galaxy expanded, showing not just the current state of the Milky Way, but its history across millions of years. The students watched in horror as the display revealed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, all connected by the mysterious network of nexus points. "The seeding," Vextel whispered, his body now rigid with the effort of containing knowledge, too vast for his mind. "They seeded dozens of worlds, created life in their own image, but only one species carried the true genetic key." The display zoomed in on a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system, Earth. But the Earth shown in the hologram was different from the one in any historical record. Ancient structures dotted its surface, structures that resembled the architect's symbols now covering Vextel's scales. "Humans," he breathed, and the word carried such weight that it seemed to shake the foundations of the Academy. "The inheritors. The only species capable of safely accessing the complete database." If responding to his words, the necklace flared with blinding light. Vextel's convulsions intensified, and several students screamed as the energy discharge shorted out their recording devices. The universal translators failed completely, leaving his words unintelligible to most of the class. "Get everyone back," Professor Jules shouted as the medical team burst through the doors. "He's going into neural cascade failure." The medical staff, A mixed team of specialists from various species immediately began preparing sedatives suitable for Akrillian physiology. But as they approached Vextel, the energy field surrounding him intensified, making it impossible to get close. The interface wasn't designed for our neural patterns, Dr. Park realized, his face pale with understanding. The pendant is trying to download information into a brain that can't handle it. Vextel's final words before the sedatives took effect were spoken in perfect English, despite his species having no natural ability to pronounce human languages. She knew this would happen. The human girl, she knew we would steal our own destruction. As the massive Krillian collapsed, the necklace's chain snapped from the violent motion. The pendant skittered across the floor, its light fading rapidly until it looked like nothing more than a simple piece of jewelry. The classroom fell silent except for the hum of medical equipment and the whispered conversations of shaken students. In the chaos, no one noticed the small figure moving through the crowd until she knelt beside the fallen necklace. Hannah Kim picked up the pendant with steady hands, and immediately it began to glow with a soft, warm light. Not the harsh, destructive energy that had nearly killed Vextel, but something gentle and welcoming, like coming home after a long journey. "How is this possible?" Dr. Park demanded, his voice shaking as he stared at the girl who had just calmed. An artifact that had driven Akrillian to madness. The energy readings alone should have killed you. Hannah looked up at him, and for a moment, her 17-year-old face seemed to carry the weight of millions of years. "Because this was never meant for them, Professor. It was meant for us." Professor Joel's compound eyes focused on her intently. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that humans are the descendants of the architects," Hannah replied simply, her words causing gasps throughout the room. "My grandmother discovered the truth through 30 years of careful research. We didn't evolve on Earth naturally. We were seeded there by the architects before they ascended to a higher plane of existence." She held up the pendant, which now pulsed with gentle light that seemed to respond to her heartbeat. "This device contains the complete history of our true heritage. Star maps, technological specifications, and most importantly, the genetic markers that prove our lineage." Dr. Park's sneeze nearly buckled. "You're saying that humans are the inheritors of the most advanced civilization in galactic history. The architects didn't vanish," Hannah continued, her voice growing stronger. "They evolved beyond physical form, but they left us as their legacy. They scattered our ancestors across the galaxy, waiting for the day when we would be ready to reclaim our birthright. The medical team had stabilized Vextel, but the Krillian remained unconscious, his scales still shifting through impossible colors. The other members of his gang, who had been experiencing similar symptoms, were also being treated for neural overload. That's why the pendant nearly killed them," Hannah explained. "Their brains aren't designed to process architect knowledge. Only humans can safely interface with the complete database." Professor Joel moved closer, his 6 arms trembling with excitement. "If what you're saying is true, then everything we know about galactic history is wrong. The hyperspace gates, the quantum networks, all of it was built by human ancestors, by the architects," Hannah corrected, "with their descendants. But we still have much to learn before we can claim their full legacy." As if to prove her point, the pendant's light suddenly expanded, projecting a holographic image that filled the entire classroom. The image showed a vast space station orbiting a star that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions. Simultaneously, ancient beings moved through its corridors, their forms shifting between physical and energy states. "The architect home world," Hannah whispered, "still there, waiting for us to come home." The revelation sent shockwaves through the classroom, but It was only the beginning. In the days that followed, the news would spread throughout the galaxy, changing everything the various species thought they knew about their place in the universe. But for now, in that moment, a 17-year-old girl from Seoul stood holding the key to humanity's greatest secret, while the bullies who had tormented her lay unconscious, their minds shattered by contact with knowledge too vast for them to comprehend. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The communication networks of Nova Academy buzzed with activity as emergency transmissions spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. Within 3 hours of Vextel's collapse, every major civilization had received detailed reports of the incident. The holographic recordings of impossible technology and ancient star maps triggered immediate responses from governments that had remained stable for a millennia. By the end of the first day, sleek diplomatic vessels began arriving at the Academy's docking bays. The Galactic Council's massive ceremonial cruiser, shaped like a crystalline cathedral, took position alongside the angular warships of the Krillian Empire, the Zentarian Federation's bioships. Grown rather than built, pulsed with organic lights. As they established orbit round the Academy's station, Hannah watched from her dormitory window as more ships arrived each hour. Vessels from civilizations she'd only read about in textbooks now filled the space round Nova Academy. The ethereal collective's ghost ships phased in and out of normal space, while the mechanical drone fleets of the Silicon Conqueror ranged, themselves in perfect geometric patterns. They're afraid, she murmured to herself, understanding the true reason for this unprecedented gathering. For thousands of years, these civilizations had built their power on the assumption that they were the galaxy's dominant species. The revelation that humans were descendants of the architects threatened to overturn the entire galactic order. Dr. Park found her in the observation lounge, staring out at the growing fleet. "The Academy's board of directors wants to meet with you," he said quietly, "along with representatives from 43 different civilizations." "I know," Hannah replied, her hand touching the pendant beneath her uniform. "They want to control the knowledge, make sure it serves their interests rather than humanity's. Can you blame them?" Dr. Park asked, "If what you've shown us is true, then humans have a legitimate claim to technologies that could reshape the galaxy. That's terrifying to species that have built their entire existence around their current level of power." Hannah turned from the window, and Dr. Park was struck again by how much she'd changed. The frightened girl who had been bullied just weeks earlier was gone, replaced by someone who carried herself with quiet confidence and ancient wisdom. "My grandmother warned me this day would come," she said. She knew that eventually the truth would be revealed. That's why she spent years preparing me, teaching me not just the technical aspects of architect knowledge, but the political implications. The main auditorium of Nova Academy had been transformed into a diplomatic chamber. Hundreds of seats had been ranged in concentric circles round a central podium, with each section designated for different species. The air shimmered with translation fields and security barriers, while recording drones from dozens of news networks hovered overhead. As Hannah entered the chamber, conversation fell silent. Every eye, compound eye, optical sensor, and psychic perception organ focused on the small human girl who had single-handedly changed the course of galactic history. She wore her grandmother's necklace openly now, the pendant pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to respond to her emotions. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard Nova Academy uniform, but she carried herself like royalty. At the center of the chamber sat the Galactic Council's High Arbiter, an ancient being whose species had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Vorthik was old beyond measure, his crystalline body having witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of millennia. Hanakim He began, His words translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. You have made claims that challenge the very foundation of our understanding of galactic history. We are here to determine the truth of these claims and their implications for the future of our civilization. I have made no claims, Hannah replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. I have simply revealed truths that have been hidden for millions of years. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates, the High Arbiters. Crystalline features shifted, displaying what might have been surprise or annoyance. You say that humans are descendants of the mythical architect civilization. You claim that your species has the right to access ancient technologies that could destabilize the current galactic order. These are not small matters, child. No, they are not, Hannah agreed. But they are true nonetheless. She activated the pendant, and the chamber filled with holographic displays showing the star maps that had driven Vextal to madness. But now, with Hannah controlling the interface, the information appeared in manageable segments that even non-human brains could process. For too long, humans have been treated as a lesser species, she began, her voice growing stronger, called primitives, mud crawlers, and worse. We've been denied equal representation in the Galactic Council, excluded from advanced research, projects, and subjected to discrimination throughout the galaxy. In the section reserved for Academy students, Vextal slowly stood up. The massive Krillian looked like a shadow of his former self, his scales dulled and his movements uncertain. The brief contact with architect knowledge had left him forever changed. His mind expanded beyond its original limitations, but also damaged by the experience. I formally apologize, he said, his voice trembling with emotion that few had ever seen from a Krillian. I was wrong. Humans aren't inferior. You're our ancestors. We owe you everything. The statement sent shockwaves through the chamber. For a member of the proud Krillian race to apologize to a human was unprecedented. But as Vextal continued, his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. I saw them, he whispered, his voice carrying, despite its softness, the architects. They showed me visions of the galaxy's true history, the Great Seeding. When they scattered life across 1,000 worlds, the careful genetic engineering that created us all. But humans carry the pure genetic template. You are their true heirs. Other students who had been part of the bullying campaign began to stand, offering their own apologies. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in galactic history, as members of dozens of species formally acknowledged their debt to humanity. But the real revelation came when Hannah fully activated the pendant, the chamber filled with holographic displays showing the locations of active architect facilities throughout the galaxy, ancient space stations the size of moons, hidden in nebulae and dark matter clouds. Vast computers that had been running calculations for millions of years. And at the center of it all, a massive structure orbiting a star that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. These sites contained technology that could revolutionize interstellar travel, medicine, and energy production. Hannah explained, her voice carrying over the awed whispers of the delegates. Machines that can create matter from pure energy. Computers that can simulate entire universes. Weapons that can restructure space-time itself. The High Arbiter leaned forward, his ancient features showing the first signs of genuine emotion in centuries. What do you want in return for access to this? Knowledge, respect, Hannah said simply. Equal representation in the Galactic Council. An end to discrimination against humans throughout the galaxy. And resources to help us reclaim our heritage safely. And if we refuse, asked the Krillian Emperor, his voice carrying the implied threat of his species' powerful military. Hannah's smile was gentle but carried undertones that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Then, the architect sites will remain sealed. The pendant responds only to human genetic markers. Without our cooperation, the knowledge remains inaccessible forever. The negotiations that followed lasted for 3 days, with representatives from every major civilization arguing, pleading, and threatening. But in the end, the mathematics were simple. Humanity held the key to the galaxy's greatest treasures, and no amount of political maneuvering could change that fact. The final agreement was signed in the same chamber where Hannah had been humiliated. Weeks earlier, the Galactic Council would be restructured to include full human representation, anti-discrimination laws would be enacted throughout Council space, and a joint human-alien research initiative would be established to explore the architect sites safely. As the delegates departed, their ships carrying news of the new galactic order to every corner of the galaxy. Hannah remained in the chamber. The pendant round her neck pulsed gently, its light reflecting off the polished walls. Dr. Park approached her, his expression thoughtful. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly. "She knew this day would come." Hannah replied. She spent her life preparing for it, making sure that when humanity finally claimed its birthright, we would be ready to handle the responsibility. Through the chamber's windows, Earth's star was visible as a tiny point of light in the distance. It looked unremarkable among the billions of stars in the galaxy. But now everyone knew the truth. That small blue world had been the cradle of the galaxy's greatest civilization, and its children were finally coming home. The age of human ascendancy had begun, not through conquest or violence, but through the simple act of remembering who they truly were. And it had all started with a 17-year-old girl who refused to let bullies break her spirit. The end.